Good evening, everybody. I hope you've had a fruitful day. I do not say happy, though I hope it has been happy. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the blessed, noble, and fully self-awakened one. Now, yesterday over the past 2 days, we rattled through dependent origination. Remember, books are written on this. And there was a question that came, which I didn't have time to answer, really. And really, one has to have the full flow of that dependent origination to be able to answer this. So it simply says, say a bit more about this basic delusion and unknowing part. Is this something we accept as a condition of life? Does it fall away with enlightenment? Does consciousness dissolve and become intuitive awareness, a higher form of knowing? Well, the whole process of our practice and our readings and all that are really to try and get rid of this unknowing, which is from which we move to a mistaken understanding, right? That we call a delusion. It's a delusion because we're not aware of it. Okay. Now, that knowing is not the same as consciousness. So if you remember, at the point of contact, there's the object, there's the sense space. So there's the information. There's the sense space which is receiving the information. It has to appear on something, and that's consciousness. It's a screen. That's all it is. And the essential delusion is the identity of this awareness with that screen. Okay, so it's similar to when, for instance, you're watching a film, you know, and or a DVD or in a cinema is even better. You've got a big wide screen, and you suddenly lose yourself in the story, and then you come out. It's as though you are in the screen. There's a lovely film by Woody Allen. I can't remember, something of The Rose, I think, where the main actor on the screen in the film steps out of the screen and meets this woman, and it's a story about how she becomes so deluded. It's her imagination, you might say, but it's beautifully done. So it's that sort of identity with what's on the screen, which is the real problem. And we want what's on the screen, and that's the wrong desire, because it's based on the understanding that this is where we're going to find real happiness, sustainable happiness. So it's not that the consciousness dissolves and becomes intuitive awareness. The intuitive awareness separates out and knows its own qualities, this intuitive awareness. So the Buddha points to that when it in a phrase which, again, he's trying to express the inexpressible with the words of his time. And so that's why sometimes this word consciousness crops up in other slightly different meanings. And in this one, I think I've mentioned it before, when he's asked, where is it that world does not find a footing? Where does the world disappear, or where does the world not appear? The world, of course, is this inner world, right? It's not the objective world. It's this five fathom length body. That's it. It's translated as the fathom length body. Within this fathom length body, the world arises and the world disappears. So in other words, it's our phenomenal mind. It's what our moment to moment experience. And the Buddha says, no, it's the wrong question. You've put the question wrongly. The question should be, where does the world not find a footing? Right. So in other words, the mental world, the emotional world isn't destroyed, but there is something upon which it cannot find a footing, and that is your intuitive awareness. That's why after his liberation, the Buddha acted just as a normal human being. He kept being a human being, but there was something in him which had now realized its own true nature, and that's the Buddha. Okay, the Buddha. So I don't know whether that's any bit of light you can shed will be welcome. Well, I hope I've shed a bit of light. In our practice, we are, of course, most times aware of what's being presented to us. So we found that place within ourselves as the objective observer, the feeler, the knower, and we're experiencing what the psychophysical organism is offering us. Yeah. Now, in that, when we're extremely in a peaceful state, when everything's quiet, when the mind has stopped thinking, and the heart is very peaceful, the body is very still, you become very much aware of being that observer, that feeler, you see. So when you're like that, as it were, just turn the attention, as it were, inward into the feeler, the knower, and ask yourself, well, what's there? What's it made of? What do you find there? Okay. So we're still on this 115. Where are we? Here we are. And the first part of it, we went on to the third part, actually, by doing the dependent origination. The question that Ananda asks the Buddha is, in what way, Venerable Sir, can a bhikkhu, remember, whenever I say bhikkhu, it's any spiritual seeker, called a wise man an inquirer? How can he be called an inquirer? So that someone can be called an inquirer when they are skilled in the elements, skilled in the bases, skilled in dependent origination, which we've just done, and skilled in what is possible and what is impossible. So he then gives us a few of these elements. So an element is what something is made up of, isn't it? Right. So you've got elements in the atom, etc. So first of all, he starts off by the 18 elements, and these you've come across. So there's the I, the form, which is being perceived, and I consciousness. So that's 3. So 6 sense bases. So there you've got your 18. And the idea is, within our meditation, to recognize that the eye perceives. You don't have to, so we say, tell it to perceive. That's what it does. The ear hears, right? The mind thinks. So one thing you can do at home, for instance, is just look around the room, right? Just as if you were a camera panning the room, not looking for anything. And you'll see the eye keeps giving you information. Yeah, whether you ask for it or not, that's what the eye does. So that's part of this not self teaching. So then, of course, Ananda asks, well, what other elements are there? So now here we have a slightly different one from the usual. So we know about the earth element, the water element, the fire element, and the air element. So those are your 4 main things of heaviness, lightness, where are we? Water, cohesiveness, elasticity, fire, heat and cold, air element, movement. But here he also adds the space element. That's not normally added. And finally, the consciousness element. So this actually puts us back into, shall we say, where we are in this space. And consciousness brings in everything that comes from the mind. So those are your 6 elements. That's one way of looking at it. So these are just ways of looking at our situation. So he's very much into deconstructing everything, unpackaging everything. Okay. Partly to take away the idea of something composite, something whole, entire, a self. And then he says, then Ananda wants some more. He says, how else can a bhikkhu be called skilled in the elements? So he then says, well, there are 6 other elements. So there's pleasure and pain. So that's your bodily, your physical experience. There's joy and grief, which is your mental experience. And there's equanimity. And to balance equanimity, to balance the two, He's also added ignorance, not knowing. But according to the commentary, they both mean the same thing. I'm not quite sure that's right. It basically, when something is very neutral, then we're either not knowing of it or just indifferent to it. Here is translated equanimity because that's the word upekkha, but actually it's more to do with indifference. Those are the 6 elements. And then he says, in what other way, so Ananda's not satisfied with that, he wants another way, another load of elements. So he says there are 6. There are the sensual desire and there's renunciation. So you have sensual desire and renunciation. There's ill will and non-ill will. Okay, so there's ill will and non-ill will, which is what we would normally call friendliness or love. There's the cruelty element and the non-cruelty element. So whatever is non-cruel must be compassionate. Whatever is not ill-willed, it must be love. So when he knows and sees these things, he's called skilled in the elements. That's the normal little phrase. And then finally, there is one more. No, there's 2 more. He says, so he's still not happy. And he says, well, is there any other way that somebody could be skilled in the elements? So he says, yes, there are 3. The sense sphere, the fine sphere, and the immaterial element. So these, of course, are the various jhanas. So the first one is the sense sphere, is what we normally experience. The fine element are the first 4 jhanas, and the immaterial ones are the arupa jhana. Arupa means not physical. Okay, so those things are the fine element, the first 4 jhanas, and the 4 immaterial jhanas really are just different levels of mind, different levels of heart mind, becoming finer and finer. Of course, it's to do with concentration. Yeah. And then the final one, he says, is another way. He says, yes, he says there might be Ananda. He starts at all these paragraphs with there might be Ananda, 2 elements, the conditioned element and the unconditioned element. So the conditioned element is everything that we experience, and the unconditioned element is that which is nirvana. Okay, so in order to be fully skilled, we have to see these elements. How important are these in our practice? Not particularly. I mean, some of them are pretty straightforward. The pain element and the pleasure. I mean, you know when you're feeling a pain, when you're feeling something pleasurable, etc., etc. The distinction of the eye, ear, nose, and all that. That's also something that comes quite naturally in our meditation when you hear something. So you're hearing. So there's a sound coming from out there. You know there's an eardrum catching it, and you know you're aware of it. There's consciousness of it. Okay. So they're just ways of, shall we say, looking at our experience. And then finally, there's the bases. So these are the 6 internal, the 6 external bases. So this is just another way of talking about the relationship between the physical world and the mental, and that passage into the mental world through the sense base. So the 6 external bases, that's what you see, what you hear, etc. And the internal bases are the ear, the nose, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's just a little summary there of all these different bases. How are we doing for time? The next, I was going to go on to the next section. It's a funny sort of passage, really. I've probably got, yes. Well, we'll try it anyway. So the question here is, Venerable Sir, in what way can a bhikkhu be called skilled in what is possible and impossible? So it is impossible, says the Buddha. It cannot happen that a person possessing right view could treat any formation as permanent. All right. So in other words, anybody with right view knows that any formation, that is your habits, is translated as formation. Your habits, your volitional formations are permanent. Treat any formation as pleasurable. To treat any any mental state, any mental habit as pleasurable. I think probably as satisfying, ultimately satisfying would be a slightly more understandable, or to treat it as a self. And then he says, then he goes, and he would understand that anybody with right view could not deprive his mother of life. So now these are the 5 heinous crimes. Anybody with the right view would not kill their father, would not deprive an arahat of life, would not draw the Tathagata's blood. Anybody, you try to kill the Buddha, but he won't die. He'll only draw blood. But that's bad news if you do it out of hatred. And cause a schism in the Sangha, a break in the Sangha. So these are called the 5 heinous crimes for which you will definitely go to a very deep hell and suffer greatly. So I think we can absolve ourselves of any of these particular crimes. Then he says, it cannot be possible, it would be impossible, cannot happen that 2 fully accomplished, fully enlightened beings arise in one world system. Okay, so there can only be one. Well, that makes it a bit of sense, because in one world system you get this whole passage of humanity, and once the Dharma gate is opened, well, it's opened. You don't, if somebody else comes along and opens the gate, you say, well, I've seen that, I know that. That's nothing new. And then of course he says it's impossible for there to happen to be 2 wheel-turning monarchs. So remember, that was his alter ego, this world-conquering monarch. So you can only have one of those, it seems, at any one time. Although we learnt before that there was in fact more than one, so I can't quite understand that. He says it is impossible, it cannot happen that 2 wheel turn contemporaneously, at the same time. Oh, well, that's it's me not reading it properly. Yes, you can't have 2 complete monarchs who rule the whole world at the same time, because it can only be one can do it, you see. That's pretty logical. I shall leave out the next section till the end. It is impossible, cannot happen, that an unwished for, undesired, disagreeable result could be produced from a wholesome bodily, verbal, or mental action, right? So that's karma. So the statement there is, if you do good, good must come of it. It's not possible for bad to come of it. It is impossible, cannot happen, that engaging in verbal misconduct, bodily misconduct, etc., that you would appear in a happy destination upon death. So this is rebirth, right? So all these things have an effect on your future life. But if you've been evil, then you can't end up in a happy realm. And then, of course, it is possible that if you have been generally wholesome in your life, etc., you'll end up in a happy realm. So that's really just stating the teachings in a slightly different way. That's all. What's possible and what's impossible. But now we come to this little passage. I think I've just about got time. And I shall leave it hanging in the air. So it is impossible to happen that a woman can be an accomplished one, a fully enlightened one. All right. So be careful now. And he understands and it's impossible. It cannot be that a woman could be a world-turning monarch. That's a bit tough, isn't it? And then he goes on. It can't be Mara and it can't be Brahma. So these are Sakka, Mara, and Brahma are the 3 great gods who rule over certain parts of heavens, you see. So now you might think to yourself, well, how could the Buddha say something like this, And then we know about the ordination of women and how he wasn't happy ordaining the women who came from his family mainly. So let's just presume that, he actually did say this, right? I mean, some people might argue, well, this is just, stuff that was added later. But let's just presume. It's not, I think we have to accept that the Buddha was a man of his times. So it's not as though he would overcome what we now looking back into history, see the biases of the time where we are, most of us anyway, well aware discrimination of all sorts. But in his day, women were still chattels of a man's household. In the Brahminical system, and maybe so also even today in the Hindu system, the woman remains a property of the man. And I'm pretty sure in saying, although I'm happy to be corrected, a woman in the Hindu system cannot achieve moksha. She has to be, which is liberation. She has to be reborn as a man. So within that sort of culture, for somebody to say that a woman could become fully liberated was a huge statement. The Jain person also said that. The Jain leader also said that. So here, of course, you could say, well, this is, of course, a logical thing because there's only one fully liberated person per world system. Now, the other thing is that people would have thought, and I still think that Easterners tend to think much more as in circular. Time is circular. We tend to think of time as progress. We're going from point A and we're moving forward to point B, which is the end of the world. But in Eastern and in early Western understanding, before Christianity, there were just these world systems that were just turning and turning. And if we look at our lives, it's very repetitious. You know, you get up in the morning, you go to bed, you get up, you go to bed. The sun rises, the sun sets. We're swinging, we're waltzing around the sun. Planets are all moving around in circles and so on and so forth. So the whole idea of world systems repeating themselves with small changes. So there are 28 past Buddhas, and each Buddha is born with a Pali name, and he has 2 attendants, and so on and so forth. And they go through a very similar sort of life form. So you can see that in that sort of background understanding about what time is, it's very obvious to say, well, you know, in this world system, it was a man, and in the next world system, it will also be a man. So, you know, it's not as though the Buddha knew everything. You know, they say that he denies he knows everything. And somewhere in the scriptures, he says, if he wants to know something, he can know it. And the commentaries actually say that. Whether he can or not, I don't know. But he definitely wouldn't have, from our point of view, he wouldn't have understood anything else but this circular motion of world systems arising and passing away. So the statement just fits in with the bias of the time concerning both the status of women and the way that people looked upon the creation of these worlds. So we mustn't be too harsh on the poor Buddha, right? He's done his best. Very good. So I hope my words have been of some assistance, that I've not caused any mutiny, and that you will, through your practice, soon achieve full liberation. Amen. So we can do a little bit of practice.